All right, Proverbs 16, this week's set of lessons we have called the sauce. But beyond that, let's call this one the Lord, the King, and the man. Understanding that this one probably more than any, even though it's moving past the compare and contrast model, gives us at least three consistent themes to summarize the Proverbs, understanding that I feel bad about all of the wisdom I'm leaving out of these discussions because I just don't see a way to organize it into a 5-minute discussion right now. But this one seems to do us the favor of at least giving us three things that it spends at least a few verses on in this particular chapter. The first of which being the Lord, as we mentioned, reading straight from the passage, beginning at verse 1. The plans of the heart belong to a man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. And I think some versions will say he weighs the motives. Verse 3, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble. Verse 5, everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished. Verse 6, by steadfast love and faithfulness, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord, one turns away from evil. And verse 7, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. We'll have a few more verses talking about the Lord, but the first 7 will then jump to verse 9, where it says, the heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Before skipping again, verse 10, going on verse 11, saying, a just balance and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work. Verse 20, whoever gives thought to the word will discover good, and blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. And the last verse of the chapter will read, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. And that last verse seemed to sum up something that caught my attention about these Proverbs about the Lord. And that seems to be the way in which casting lots was the way in which they would often try to plan their way. And the proverb is saying that you may cast the lot, but it has no value if the Lord isn't actually behind the decision that it's pointing you towards. That goes back to the first verse of the chapter that talks about the way in which a person's heart or a man's heart can plan his way, but the answer of the tongue actually comes from the Lord. And that was similar to verse 9, which says a man's heart once again can plan his way, but the Lord establishes his steps, which reminds me of the way that I used to admire those and still do admire those who are chill under all kinds of stressful circumstances. See, this is reminding me of the way in which one of the characteristics I began to see in them over time was the way in which they did not need to necessarily control the factors affecting their decisions and their way forward. And so counsel that comes from Jesus that we mentioned before, to be anxious over nothing, seems a lot easier to do the more we feel comfortable about the parts of our lives that we simply don't understand. Does that mean that we simply give into the belief that ignorance is bliss? I don't believe so, because the Proverbs about the king, roughly 5 Proverbs, that being Proverbs 10, 12, 13, 14, and 15, are going to talk about the way in which kings value substance. For example, verse 12, it is an abomination to kings to do evil, for the throne is established by righteousness, one of our key ingredients to the sauce. Verse 13 will then say, righteous lips are a delight of a king, and he loves him who speaks what is right. Talking about the way that we speak and the way that we hear, 2 more ingredients of the sauce. And then I should probably back up to verse 10 where it says, an oracle is on the lips of a king. His mouth does not sin in judgment, alluding to wisdom, one of those other areas or ingredients of the sauce. And so likewise, when it seems that verses 27 through 30 talk about the man, they talk about either the man or a man that we would do well to stay away from. And so in this proverb that seems to remind me of those people who found peace in life, it wasn't so much the fact that they found bliss in ignorance as much as they found the ability to focus on the things that they could control as opposed to worrying about the things that they couldn't. To the degree that they could control their focus and their company, they seem to focus focus on keeping company with those producing the kind of habits or ingredients that are essential to the sauce.